Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most dramatic turns in Eastern Europe's geopolitical landscape. Moscow's vital supply and strategic lifeline has just been cut off. Poland has officially closed its border with Belarus, and the entire region has plunged into chaos. This shocking move not only isolates Belarus, but also cripples Russia's key logistical route to the west. What's happening on the ground is not just a border issue, it's a crisis that could redefine the power balance in Europe and send ripple effects all the way to the Kremlin. Poland's decision to shut down the border came after months of rising tension, accusations of hybrid warfare, and fears of migrant manipulation by Belarusian authorities. For years, this crossing served as a critical artery for trade, fuel, and military logistics linking Russia, Belarus, and Europe. Now, that connection has been abruptly severed. The consequences are enormous. Thousands of trucks are stranded, Belarusian exports are frozen, and Moscow's supply chain to its western front is being choked. This isn't just a political statement, it's an act of strategic containment. Poland, backed by NATO and the European Union, has effectively created a blockade without firing a single shot. Belarus, already under heavy sanctions and economic strain, now faces isolation from its last major European access point. The economic fallout is immediate. Inflation is skyrocketing, fuel shortages are emerging, and industries in Minsk are grinding to a halt. Inside Belarus, panic is spreading. Citizens are lining up for basic goods, fearing shortages and price spikes. The Lukashenko regime is blaming Poland and the West for economic sabotage, but many Belarusians see this crisis as the result of their government's close alliance with Moscow. For years, Belarus has relied on Russian oil, gas, and financial aid. But with the border closed, even Moscow is finding it harder to maintain that flow of support. The pipelines and rail routes that once ensured smooth transfers of goods are now bottlenecked or blocked altogether. The timing couldn't be worse for Russia. The war in Ukraine continues to drain resources, and the Kremlin's logistics are already stretched thin. Belarus has served as Russia's silent partner and staging ground for operations, a place to move troops, weapons, and supplies discreetly. But now, with Poland shutting down the western gate, that convenience is gone. Every shipment must now reroute through longer, riskier paths, increasing costs and delays. The military implications are profound. Belarus itself is teetering on instability. Widespread protests have erupted again in major cities like Minsk, Brest, and Hrodna. The government's promises of stability have collapsed. Opposition leaders, long exiled or silenced, are regaining momentum. Many Belarusians believe this crisis could finally push Lukashenko's regime to the brink. When trade dries up and the people's patience runs out, revolutions often follow. The government is responding with mass arrests and information blackouts, but the internet leaks tell a different story of panic in the government and growing anger in the streets. Poland, on the other hand, insists that its actions are purely defensive. Officials in Warsaw claim that Belarus has been funneling migrants into Polish territory as a form of hybrid warfare, a way to destabilize Europe and force political concessions. By closing the border, Poland says it's protecting national security and the integrity of the EU frontier. NATO has expressed full support, warning that any provocation against Poland will be seen as a threat to the entire alliance. The stakes have never been higher. Moscow, furious at Poland's move, has accused Warsaw of economic aggression and hinted at retaliation. But the truth is that Russia has few options left. Its economy is already bleeding under Western sanctions, and its supply chains are under pressure from multiple sides. Losing the Polish-Belarusian corridor is a massive blow. It means fewer routes for oil exports, restricted trade access, and reduced influence over Europe. For Putin, this is not just an economic setback, it's a symbolic one. It exposes the limits of Russian power outside its borders. Within Belarus, the political atmosphere is collapsing fast. Reports suggest cracks are forming inside Lukashenko's inner circle. Some military and intelligence officials are quietly contacting European intermediaries, signaling they may not support the regime if mass unrest erupts. The loyalty that kept Lukashenko in power for decades is evaporating. People are no longer afraid. Videos on social media show police units refusing to suppress demonstrations, and chants of "down with the dictator" echoing across the capital. At the same time, Russia is trying desperately to stabilize the situation. Russian advisors and security personnel have reportedly arrived in Belarus under the guise of logistical coordination, but their real goal is to ensure Lukashenko stays in line. Moscow cannot afford to lose Belarus. It's not just an ally, but a buffer state, a geographic shield against NATO. If Belarus collapses or turns westward, the Kremlin's western defense line crumbles. That's why Russian state media is spinning the crisis as a Western plot. They want to frame it as another front in the hybrid war against Russia. But for ordinary Belarusians, that propaganda no longer works. They see the reality: empty shelves, long queues, job losses, and no future. The young generation is tired of being caught between two superpowers. Many are fleeing to Lithuania and Latvia, seeking safety and work. The brain drain is accelerating, leaving behind a fragile state struggling to maintain even basic functions. The power blackouts, currency collapse, and protests are symptoms of a deeper truth: Belarus is breaking apart. Meanwhile, Poland and Lithuania are strengthening their borders, deploying troops, and increasing surveillance. The European Union has promised financial and military support to prevent any potential spillover. There's growing fear that Russia might attempt to test NATO's resolve by sending troops close to the Polish border or stirring trouble through hybrid attacks. Cyber intrusions, disinformation campaigns, and airspace violations have already been reported. The tension is palpable. One wrong move could spark a much larger conflict. What's even more alarming is how this development reshapes Russia's access to Europe. Without Belarus as a stable transit partner, Russia's trade with the West becomes even more limited. The Kremlin might try to reroute through the Baltic or the Caucasus, but these routes are either blocked or risky. China, Russia's new economic partner, may step in with logistical help, but Beijing will not want to get entangled in a European confrontation. This isolation could push Russia into deeper economic dependency on China, something Moscow fears but cannot avoid. As for Lukashenko, he's running out of cards to play. His survival has always depended on balancing Moscow and the West, but now both sides are turning against him. Putin sees him as unreliable, and Europe sees him as a dictator. The only question left is whether his own military and people will finally force him out. If that happens, Belarus could enter a chaotic transition period, and that would have massive implications for the region. A pro-European government in Minsk would completely change the strategic map of Eastern Europe. In Moscow, analysts are sounding the alarm. The loss of Belarus as a reliable ally would be seen as a strategic disaster. It would mean NATO's influence reaching even closer to Russian borders and Putin losing one of his last strongholds. This would embolden opposition forces inside Russia itself, where dissatisfaction with the war and economic hardship continues to grow. Putin's image as a strongman who never loses ground would take another hit. Poland's move, while bold, is calculated. By cutting off the border, Warsaw is tightening the noose around two authoritarian regimes at once. It's sending a message that Europe will not tolerate manipulation or blackmail from Minsk or Moscow. The decision aligns perfectly with NATO's long-term goal of isolating Russia's influence from Central and Eastern Europe. This isn't just a border closure, it's a geopolitical strike. As the crisis unfolds, the humanitarian cost is also rising. Thousands of migrants trapped on the Belarusian side are running out of food and shelter. Local communities are facing shortages and economic collapse. International organizations are calling for humanitarian corridors, but Poland insists its border will remain sealed until Belarus ends its aggressive tactics. It's a brutal standoff, and innocent civilians are paying the price. The next few weeks will be critical. If the Belarusian regime cannot stabilize the economy or contain the protests, the entire country could spiral into uncontrollable chaos. Russia might step in militarily to preserve control, but that would risk direct confrontation with NATO forces along the border. Europe is bracing for the possibility of another war zone emerging right at its doorstep. In the bigger picture, Poland's closure of the border is a warning to other nations aligned with Moscow. The message is clear: actions have consequences, and the West is no longer hesitant to act. This crisis could mark the beginning of a broader containment strategy aimed at pushing Russia further into isolation. The economic, political, and military impacts will continue to unfold, reshaping Europe's security landscape for years to come. As Moscow scrambles to respond and Belarus sinks deeper into chaos, one thing is certain: the old balance of power in Eastern Europe is gone. The curtain has fallen on a fragile alliance built on fear and dependence. A new era of confrontation, resilience, and realignment is beginning. The world is watching closely to see how far Russia and Belarus will go to survive this storm, and whether Poland's bold gamble will spark the change that could finally shift the course of this long, bitter struggle. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more updates as this historic crisis unfolds.